Hello, welcome to Board Games with Niramas. I'm Joseph, this is Draco, and today we're talking about our top 10 tips and tricks in Gloomhaven. Now, we have just finished a huge playthrough of the whole Gloomhaven campaign in the digital mode over on Steam. Had a lot of fun. It was over 100 hours in 32 streams over a month of daily streams. It's been really fun, and if you haven't seen that, you can go check it out. I'll link to the playlist for Gloomhaven here, of course. So let's share some ideas and tips and tricks that we got all through this campaign. Now, of course, I played the game before that as well in the actual board game a few years ago when it came out, so I played both versions in that sense, but it is the same game, so this list is applicable on both the digital and the actual board game of Gloomhaven, and actually, in a sense, Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, and upcoming Frosthaven, I guess, as well, though even though Frosthaven, I don't know all the rules yet. But let's get going with my number 10 tips and trick. So, number 10 here is the Temple Bless. And this might be a bit obvious. I mean, everyone, after you play a while, everyone knows about this, and that you can go to the temple, you can donate 10 gold per mercenary, and you will become blessed. Now, I do forget this sometimes, and I think a lot of people do. You go to a hard scenario and you realize that, well, maybe those blesses would have helped you out a lot. Now, it is, of course, a gamble in your modifying deck. You don't know if you're ever going to draw those, and if you don't draw them during the scenario, then they are lost. They don't stick in the deck. If you draw them, they're also lost. It's a one-time bless where you get double damage, of course. But it's a fairly good price, I would say. You just pay those 10, depending on where you are. Maybe you want to save up some money, but a lot of times do the Temple Bless. Also, this has another positive effect. When you do the Temple Bless, you will level up the actual temple, in a sense. You will get a higher level there, and then every level you meet, every 10 blesses you do, you will also increase some prosperity for Gloomhaven. And prosperity is the way you level up Gloomhaven itself, or sort of the merchant guild, I guess. And that way you will get access to new items in the shop, and also new mercenaries that you bring into the game later on will start at a higher level. So that is also important. So Temple Blesses, you gotta do them. At number 9, we have the topic of burning cards. I know some people have gone into this in really depth, and there's probably a mathematical formula you could use to really maximize how often should you burn a card and so on. What I tend to do, though, is I tend to build the deck. Well, of course, depending on the skills of the different cards, the abilities, but also I try to avoid burning cards in my deck to start with, unless they are really strong. But there are a lot of effects here that aren't that strong, and it still burns the card. There's a lot of mercenaries that have cards like maybe, I don't know, attack 4 and you burn the card or stuff like that. I don't like that. Your cards are your life, in a sense. It's your stamina, how long you can keep going in the mission. So you want to be careful about just how you build your deck with burning cards, and also when you have the deck with burning cards, when is the right time to use to use that effect. And sometimes it's early in the mission, because, you might have it's very hard when you start a new scenario. You don't know how many rooms, you don't know how hard the rooms will be and all that. But sometimes you want to do it early, especially those ongoing effects that you can have with retaliation or different kinds of buffs and so on that you can have for the party. Those you should burn early or get them into play, which is sort of the same thing, because if you ever remove them, then they will go to the burn pile, right? But I think most of the time, most burn cards you want to save for the last room, or when you get an idea. If you open the door to the last room, you get an idea, okay, how much time do we need to spend here to complete whatever the scenario goal is? How closely are we? Or in a case where you realize that, well, this character is not going to make it anyway. They're going to go exhausted. It doesn't matter at that stage. Instead of just having 4 cards and just short resting a few times and burning it that way, maybe you should use the actual effect to burn, to get good effect out of them, and then you exhaust that mercenary. But the other ones can keep going, right, if you have a party of a bunch of mercenaries. So I think burning cards is mainly it's only number 9 here, but I think there's a lot in this, and I think how to manage this is one of the fun parts of the game, and it's also one of those things that can really level up your skills in playing the game by getting better at figuring out when to burn cards. But usually try to avoid it at the beginning of a scenario. At number 8, we have the whole topic of opening doors. Now, this is fairly basic. I think this is mainly for beginner players, for new players to the Gloomhaven. Wonderful world of Gloomhaven. You got to be careful about opening doors, because when you open a door, you will reveal new enemies that are in that next room, and they will get to act even though they sort of, their initiative value might already have been passed. If you open a door late, let's say at 80, you move at 80 initiative and you open the door, even if they have initiative value of 30 and 40, they will still get to act right away after your turn is done. And that can be devastating, especially if, in the general rule, I would say don't open doors late. Open them, like if you have 3 characters you're playing, if you're playing solo or you're playing with 2 friends, make sure you open the door at the beginning of the round. So then you have time to react to whatever is in there and what they are going to do. Also, it could be a very good idea to open a door with extra movement. So let's say you have a movement 5 card, and then you're 2 spaces away from the door. You can go to the door, open it, get to see what's in there, and you also get to know what they are going to do that round. But then you still have 3 movement left, so if need be, you can move back into the previous room. Also, another little trick here concerning doors that I'll just throw in here is when you have invisibility, and this is going to be changed for Frosthaven from what I understand, but for Gloomhaven, it still works this way, that if your character is standing in a doorway and you're invisible, which a few characters can become invisible, well, anyone can with a certain item, but then all the enemies in that room will not act if they aren't, ranged, and they can shoot through the invisible character to someone else in the previous room, or if they are flying, or if, they can ignore you and fly through you. This is kind of silly thematically, because if they can't see you in the doorway, shouldn't they just try to move through the doorway, and then like, oh, bump, something is here, and they should, smack the air, or you standing there invisible. Anyway, it works mechanically, and it's a good thing. You can use this to your advantage. And if you go invisible, I'll just throw this in here as well, try to do it early. Try to do it so that the next round you go late, so that you stay invisible for a long time, so the enemies will sort of act before you, but they will not do anything. And then it's your turn, and at the end of your turn, you will stop being invisible. So that was a little extra tips there, but generally be careful about opening doors in Gloomhaven. Next up, we are touching on the subject of doors and new rooms again. And my tip here is to rest before you enter a new room. Now, it of course depends on how many cards you have left and all that, but that's something that has hurt me a lot of times in Gloomhaven, is that if I spend, let's say I have 9 cards in my deck, then I spend maybe, let's say I spend 6 of them in the first room to get rid of the monsters in there and so on. And then if I'm too eager, I might use, 2 out of the last 3 cards to go into the new room. Now, if I will get hit a lot, I will only have 1 card left that I can burn. And then if I get hit again, I will have to burn 2 cards out of my discard pile, which is terrible. You always want to avoid that happening. And that risk of that happening increases a lot if you're not careful about when you enter a new room. So a good tip here is to set it up in such a way that you are just freshly rested, even if it's a long rest or short rest, it doesn't matter, but that you have a bunch of cards already, especially if your character is low health. If you have a lot of health, I guess you can be a little more, don't need to be as careful with this. But if you're low on health, you really need to make sure that you can burn just 1 card from your hand if you need to do it to stay alive, instead of ending up in the situation where you have to burn 2. Because you might open that door and there might be, 6 oozes in there, and they all have a ranged attack that round. And all of a sudden, that's gonna go bad. So yeah, be careful about that and make sure that you rest at the right time in the scenarios. There's a lot of timing involved in Gloomhaven, which also is part of the fun. Then at number 6, I want to talk a little bit about initiative and initiative variation. Now, I tend to go quickly as much as I can. And I think in general, it is a good idea, especially if you have abilities that can stun or disarm or strong attacks. If you can go before the enemy and you can kill them or stun them or incapacitate them in some way, maybe you can immobilize them and they can't go up to you and hit you. That is awesome, of course. They will waste a round in that sense. However, I think I need to improve myself, and I think a lot of people out there might need to consider when to go late, because there are situations when you want to go late as well. I think the key element to knowing this initiative variation and know when to go early and when to go late is to know the enemy types. So if you see what enemy types there are at the beginning of the round when you pick your cards, you don't know exactly what they will do. But as you keep playing the game, you will start to learn what could a bandit do, for example. Or like what could a bandit archer do? How often do they go early? How often do they go late? In general, I would say if you're new to the game, it's pretty intuitive. So if there's a big, strong, massive frost demon that you have in front of you, it's probably going to go a bit later on the scale from 1 to 100. If you have a little hound, it's probably going to be quick. So it does make sense to try to feel out, okay, what's usually the thing for what fits this monster that you have in front of you. And also, some monsters have some ranged attacks, even though they are not ranged usually and so on. And when you start seeing those patterns, and when you start learning, that's when you can also figure out, is it possible to go late, or is it the risk that they will go before you? It might look like they can't reach you to hit you, but they might get a ranged attack that turn and move closer to you and then be able to range attack you before. And they might have nasty effects as well, like stun and immobilize and disarm and so on. So then you really don't want to end up in a situation, which is one of my most hated moments in Gloomhaven, is when I have a good attack loaded up, I'm ready to go, and then the enemy gets to go before me in initiative order, and they immobilize me. And all of a sudden, my good attack is just wasted. I can't get there to hit them. So be very careful about that. And this is something you can play around with, of course, and try out different, how to do it. I will also put in here, when we talk about initiative, when you have summons, this is something you got to be careful about as well. You can have summons from items, and some characters have summons as well, because the summon will always act before your character or your mercenary. So you don't want to put out the summon in such a way that the enemies will get to act before the summon acts, because they might kill it. Or maybe you want to. We'll get more into that later here, but be careful about the initiative variation. And number 5 is summons as shields, as I call it. I do want to talk a little bit more about summons, and I wanted them to have their own spot here. Summons is a very strong element of the game and the gameplay. Being able to summon and then the summons will act on their own. You can't really control them unless you have certain cards and certain characters and so on. But in general, they will act on their own. But by knowing the rules for how the summon acts, that is going to help you maximize the use of your summons a lot more. So the first summon you can get access to, I think, is the skeleton that you can have. It's not that great, but it can work very great as a shield. And same goes for later summons as well. So especially if you're up against some kind of strong enemy that will do a strong hit on you, you have to calculate. So let's say you have a summon that might, in total, it might get to act once or twice. It might do, 4 or 5 damage in total. Maybe it's better to use it as a shield, and because the summon, if the summon takes a 10 hit or an 8 damage hit, well, that's probably better than you taking it, right? So you can put the summon in such a way. When you summon it, you can summon it in such a space that it will be the target for the enemies. Because remember, it always goes before you, so it's always lower in initiative value, which means they will hit the summon instead of you if they have a choice. So you can summon it next to yourself if it's equal distance to the enemy, because the enemy will move up to you and it will hit the summon instead of you. Just be careful though, if the enemy has multiple targets, then it will hit both of you. So in that case, you don't want to put it next to you. You want to put it maybe behind you in such a way that they can't be reached, or maybe in front of you so that it will have a closer distance to the enemy, which means the enemy could move up to it and smash it. If there's it's hard to go into details on this, but in general, I think you should start considering the summons, as someone called it in my playthrough series here. One of the viewers called it, a moving health potion. Because that's basically what it is. If it saves you a 6 damage hit or 5 damage hit, that's a good item. That's like you having another major healing potion, right? And there might be, they might do some damage as well, or block some paths and so on. On this topic, I will also mention that summons can be very well used against enemies that spawn summons themselves, or multiply, as in the case of my favorite enemy, the ooze. That was a joke. So, if you go up to an ooze, it's going to summon this turn. It won't summon unless it has space to summon in. It can't summon on gold, it can't summon on difficult terrain or hazardous terrain. So what you want to do is you want to try to surround it. So if you can corner it and get one of those slots blocked by your summon, all of a sudden the ooze will still take 2 damage, but it won't multiply. So it's a perfect situation to handle an ooze, or cultist for that matter. That can be really annoying as well, as they summon skeletons. So you can use summons in many ways. And last tip here on the topic of summons is careful on when you summon a summon, because if you have a summon that's moving pretty slowly, which most of them do, to be honest, then maybe not summon it in the first room. If you see that you're going to move, you can see from the start how many rooms you're going to move through. The summon will probably lag behind and not be that useful. So maybe save it to a crucial time during the scenario where you see that, okay, you can get use out of it. If it survives and keeps going, well, it has a chance to catch up to that last room where you might be spending some time fighting some kind of boss or whatever. So good luck with the summon use. They are really fun. I do like summons. Alright, at number 4 we have the topic of small heals. Now this is mainly, I guess, a tip, for maybe newer players in Gloomhaven. Because if you come from playing a lot of role-playing games or dungeon crawlers and other type of RPG games, and then you see that you have an effect on a card that says like, oh, heal for 2 or heal 1, you might think initially that's really low, that's really bad, I don't want to have this card, and then you don't include it in your deck, right? But in Gloomhaven, small heals are really good, and the reason is because we have the 2 main sort of negative conditions that your mercenary might get on it, and that is the wound and it's the poison. So quickly here, just poison adds +1 damage every time you take damage from an attack. It adds +1, and the wound will make you take one, like bleed, take 1 damage every time at the start of your turn. When you heal, and if you have a wound, well, the wound goes away and then the heal goes through, which is awesome. But if you have poison, the poison will block the heal, so it will remove the poison, but it won't heal any health for you. So having small heals, especially if it's multiple targets, let's say you're playing 3 characters and you have a heal 2 target 3, then you can heal all 3 of you as long as you're within range and so on, and remove poison and wound or any of those, and that can be worth it even though it doesn't heal that much damage. I think that's something that I felt like when I started playing Gloomhaven, I think I overlooked this. I think this is something I learned recently here in my playthrough of the whole campaign, is that I realized how good it is actually, how important it is to have those small heals. Especially say you have a major healing potion or a super healing potion and you're poisoned. That's terrible. You don't want to spend a super healing potion because you will only remove the poison. You will not get any health back. So having a little bit of a heal somewhere, like heal 1 even on yourself, well, then you get rid of poison. Then you can use that super healing potion. So small heals, I think, is something that might be underestimated by a lot of players in Gloomhaven. And number 3, we have how to handle armor. This is something you will encounter a lot of times in Gloomhaven, and the more you go into the campaign, the more you will need to handle this. There's a lot of enemies out there that have strong armor. They could have, innate abilities that they always start with, always have armor. A lot of them, have 3, there's even 4, and I think there's even a 5 if you get the right elite in there. And that's tricky, because every time you do damage, you have to get through the armor to actually do some damage. Now, in general, though, the creatures that have high armor, they also have low health. So my favorite trick to deal with this is if you can get a wound in on them. So if you can wound them, then if you attack them and you apply a wound, it doesn't matter if you do damage. The wounds will still be affecting them, and they will take 1 damage at the start of each of their turns. If they don't have a way to heal, then they will die. It's just a matter of time. Maybe you can avoid them, maybe you can run from them or keep your distance and so on, maybe immobilize them so they can't reach you, and just wait for the wound to do its job. Another thing is, of course, poison. Poison helps. If you poison them, that's +1. It's like negating one of those shields, basically. And then you also have the effect of pierce. So there's attacks that have pierce, and that will ignore some shields, some armor on the enemy. However, you don't have in general. Now, I played with all the mercenaries in my campaign playthrough, and there's not that many strong pierce effects. There are a few characters that can apply some pierce, like maybe pierce 2 or 3 and so on. But in general, I would say my standard solution when I see this like living spirit elite over there, he has 4 armor. My standard solution is to try to get him wounded. There's also some effects. I'm not going to spoil anything, but some mercenaries have effects that can apply damage and so on, sort of as a wound, without it being a wound. So there are some mercenaries are better at handling this than others. But going up and doing an attack of 3 or 4, it's pretty much useless. You need to get a doubler or something to actually get through there. Or, +2, whatever. So try to find ways to, instead of doing massive damage, instead try to find smart ways to handle these armored enemies and see if you can take them out. There's also some enemies that have cards, so they might not have any armor to start with, but they have like a card that says this turn they get extra armor. Well, don't attack them that turn then, if you can avoid it. If you can attack their neighbor that doesn't have armor. So try to ignore them that turn, because that armor can really eat up your overall damage output. Number 2 is something that I really got to experience a lot in my playthrough here recently. How important items are in this game. And especially stamina pots, which is my favorite item out there in general, because it's always good to be able to get cards back. It's like prolonging your stamina, your life, basically, or your energy in the scenario. So the first thing I always buy for my mercenaries when I get to that point is the major stamina pot, or the minor one if I haven't unlocked the major yet. It's so important. You just have to have it on all characters, I think. I don't think there's a way around it. Because it doesn't matter what character it is. I mean, some of them even more than others need it. Especially if you have a character that burns a lot of cards, they will exhaust earlier. Then you really need those stamina. Sometimes you can even do both the major and the minor stamina pot as well. Now, in general, items are so important. I experienced this because as I went through the end of the campaign, sort of without any spoilers, I got some new characters unlocked, and I just sort of went through characters, retired them in order to unlock more side quests. So I was playing around a lot with high-level characters that start out with not enough gold to get full, set of items on them. And then I realized how big of a difference it made. They weren't that strong anymore as they used to be when they had all those items. And you need to get the right item for the right character, which is always a bit tricky. I think there's different schools here to go, and I don't have a perfect solution for this. But in general, I try to go for things that are passive abilities that will help you the whole scenario, instead of having a one-time. If you have an item that is consumed, that is used up, and it's just a one-time use, I'd rather have things that I can refresh, or passive things that is ongoing, giving me more movement or giving me more damage output. I also like everything that, of course, apply poison and wound and curses. So yeah, I guess it's a matter of taste a little bit, and I think some people that have been watching my playthrough maybe didn't agree with me on which item I got for a certain character and so on. But items is super important in this game. I would definitely spend money on items first before you even think about going into enchantments, which I won't go into in this one as well, because that's a little bit spoilerish. I'm not going to talk more about that. But yeah, don't forget the stamina pots. That's my number 2 tip in Gloomhaven. And my number 1, the most important tip I have for you here for Gloomhaven, is curses. Curses! Because you know yourself, when you play Gloomhaven, the worst moment that you can experience in the game is when you have your strong attack 6 card and you're ready. It's going to burn the card, it's a one-time use, you're going to smash that living spirit away from this room, and then you draw a miss. That's the worst, that can make people rage quit in this game. And so imagine the enemy having to do that over and over if you can keep cursing them, because curses are misses, and they can be they can have up to 10 curses in the enemy modifying deck, and as they use them you can refill if you have the right mercenaries or abilities to do that. So my favorite thing to do in Gloomhaven is to curse the enemies as soon as possible, as earliest in the scenario as I can. I want to reach that 10 if I can. Not all characters can do that, but just get anything in there. All curses you can get in there is good, because basically, well, then of course you need to get lucky and they need to draw them at the right time. You don't want to have some little imp that is doing a damage 1 attack draw the curse. You want to have the big guy draw the curses. So it's also going to be a lot of RNG in this, of course. But just having them in there, it's like life insurance. If they have a lot of curses in their decks, I feel more relaxed and I can take more risks going into a new room, maybe going up against something that I usually wouldn't, because I can look at their deck and I know especially in the digital game, it's really easy to just hover over their portrait and you see, okay, so they have total, 15 cards in the deck that they haven't used already, and 7 of those are curses. I feel pretty good. The odds are on my side. So yeah, get those curses going. And I think most characters have some way of cursing, or you can even get items that can help them curse as well. So putting the curses into the modifying deck of the enemy is so good. It's a bit annoying when you play the actual board game, because you have to shuffle a lot. You have to put those cards in there. In the digital game, it's just handled so easily. So it's one of the reasons I like the digital game almost even more these days than the actual board game, because everything is handled. I don't need to shuffle. I don't need to put... It's so easy with all the upkeep. But I understand also a lot of people like the feeling of actually playing the board game, especially if you're playing with friends, of course, sitting around. If you're playing solo, I do really recommend you get the digital edition on Steam, because it's so easy. It's just everything is handled, and it's easy to play multiple characters yourself, and you don't forget the rules and so on. So yeah, that is my top 10 tips and tricks for Gloomhaven. I hope it helped someone. Maybe you knew about 5 of this already and you're like just fast forwarding, but maybe something in here could help you out to prevail a little bit better in Gloomhaven. And of course, you can also, tell me in the comment section, what did you think about these tips and tricks? Do you have any tips and tricks you want to share with the other viewers? Because other people, could read your comment in the comment section. So share them there. If you enjoyed this video, press the thumbs up button, like the video down here, and also subscribe to the channel for more cool videos up ahead. And then you get notifications from YouTube when I post new videos if you click the little bell symbol down there as well. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you had fun. I did have fun setting up this list. And have a great evening or morning, or whenever you're watching. Take care. Bye-bye.